Welcome to the Brain Injury Association of New York State's webinar, The Invisible Wounds Within the Veteran Community, What You Need to Know. I am Carla Giovaniello, Brain Injury Training and Services Project Director here at the Brain Injury Association of New York State. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, a few housekeeping details. Because of limited time, we ask that you please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. During the Q&A session, questions can be submitted via the question text box. The text box option should be visible to you on the GoToWebinar toolbar on your desktop. If you are having trouble viewing this option, please contact Citrix Tech Support at 1-800-263-6317. Again, that number is 1-800-263-6317. This number should also be visible on your toolbar. The speakers will do their best to answer questions in the order that they are received. Any questions they are unable to address may be submitted via email to the association. We will be recording this webinar session and plan to post it along with the PowerPoint slides to our website, www.bianys.org. Information about contacting the association and viewing the webinar will also be provided in a follow-up email after the webinar has concluded. Before I turn the microphone over to Adriana and Rebecca, let us begin with a quick poll question to see who is in our audience today. Please take a moment to answer the question. I'll close the poll in about 20 seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. All right, it looks like we have a diverse group of individuals in attendance. We always like to see that. And again, I would like to thank you all for joining. It is with sincere pleasure that I introduce our webinar presenters for the day, Adriana Rodriguez and Rebecca Wynn. Adriana is the coordinator of the Home Again Veterans and Family Initiative and the master trainer for the Martha K. Selig's Educational Institute of JBFCS. She is currently responsible for program development, training, direct service, consultation to community providers, and supervision of the Home Again Veterans and Family Initiative. Rebecca is a trainer for the Home Again Veterans and Family Initiative. She joined the United States Marine Corps after graduating high school and was honorably discharged in 2001. Rebecca served with the Chemical Biological Incident Response Force, CBIRF, and participated in numerous national security events. She has worked in various capacities in higher education. Her particular areas of expertise are veteran and non-traditional student issues. Adriana, Rebecca, good morning. Good afternoon, I should say.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As Carla mentioned, my name is Adriana Rodriguez, and I'm the coordinator of Home Again Veterans and Family Initiative at JBFCS. And with me today, as Carla mentioned, is my co-trainer, Rebecca Wynn. To all the veterans listening, we thank you for your service and for tuning in. Today, we'll be discussing one of the invisible wounds this generation of veterans has been experiencing, namely traumatic brain injuries, and what you need to know to ensure your service is worthy of our veterans. In the past decade, service members and their families have faced stressors that are unlike any other wars our country has experienced. These stressors are due to a number of variables, specifically an all-volunteer force serving in the two longest wars in American history. Because of the frequency of multiple deployments and due to the technological advances in the battlefield, there are many more veterans who are returning home with injuries than we've ever seen. This means we have to gear up to not only help our veterans successfully reintegrate, but also take into account their strengths and resilience in order to avoid the pitfalls other generations of veterans have experienced. At Home Again, we're intimately aware of the nuances this new generation of veterans face. We focus on preparing community service providers to understand the normative reintegration challenges veterans experience by highlighting the importance of understanding that the military is a subculture in its own right and remind you that you don't have to reinvent the wheel to provide good treatment to veterans. But you need to remember that the veteran is the expert in their military career. Our goal is to help community providers and you better engage veterans with their military families. We've taught this training to over 1,100 people in the last 2 years. We've done so nationally, and we do so by using the veteran's voice. Today, in order to paint this picture, Rebecca will provide an overview about her experience as a Marine, and the culture of the military. I'll review the reintegration challenges veterans experience when they return home. And in addition, we'll talk briefly about TBI and its impact on readjustment to civilian life. As mentioned, we view the community of veterans as a distinct subculture that needs to be reckoned with because the number, the length, frequency of the deployments of this generation of veterans, if it's not addressed, if all the stressors that they're experiencing are not addressed, it will impede successful reintegration if preventive measures are not in place. Therefore, as we move through this review in the next hour, we want you guys to consider some of the following questions. What are my feelings about the military? What are my feelings about the ongoing war efforts? Will my feelings affect how I work with military families? Do I use any language or make reference to the military in any way that is negative? We also want you to consider your political inklings. How do you feel that your politics affect the way that you work with the military? Our hope is that you'll be able to see how much you bring to the table when you're working with this community. And the first step in working with veterans is to ask yourself, what are my beliefs about this culture? So to gauge some of the understanding that you guys are bringing to the table, we want to ask you guys another poll question. We'll be asking you 3 poll questions in total today. And what we want to do is get a sense from you as to where you're at. So the first question is, all service members are considered soldiers. True or false? Check whichever one you think is best. We'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, we're coming up with the poll results right now, and it looks like 47% of you said true, all service members are considered soldiers, and 50, does that say 52?
I think it says 57.
57% of you.
We can't see it very well, everybody.
53. It's 53%.
53. Right.
Thank you. So 53% of you think they're not all considered soldiers. The answer is false. Not all service members are considered soldiers, and Rebecca's going to tell us why.
So again, I'm Rebecca Wynn. I just want to tell you too, Carla gave a little bit about my bio, but I was also married to an active duty Marine who is now a Lieutenant Colonel. He's still active for 10 years. So I guess you could say I have about 14 years of military experience as a service member and as a military spouse in a military family.
And your dad.
And my father was a Vietnam veteran as well. We'll get into that a little bit later. So as far as this question, you see the slide up here. We have 5 branches of the military. But the first thing we need to keep in mind is that not all veterans are cut from the same cloth, meaning we vary from branch to branch. Not all service members are considered soldiers. As you will see here, there are 5 emblems, each representing the 5 branches of the military. The first emblem is for the Army, whose focus is on land-based, long-term, full-spectrum combat operations. Service members in the Army are referred to as soldiers. The second emblem is Navy. They are in charge of maritime security, amphibious operations, coastal protection, aviation support, and humanitarian crisis response capability. Service members in the Navy are referred to as sailors. The third emblem is for the Marines, and we are tasked with the expeditionary amphibious combat capability, combined arms, and air land, and sea expertise. We can self-sustain for a short period and have full spectrum combat operations. I was a Marine, so I will always be referred to as a Marine. And I'll get into this importance in a second. The fourth is the Air Force, whose focus is on strategic air power, long-range air operations, which includes bombing, intelligence collection, and air support. Service members in the Air Force are referred to as airmen. The fifth emblem listed is for the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard is actually not an official branch of the military. As of September 11th, 2001, they became part of the Department of Homeland Security. They can operate under the Department of Defense as a service in the Department of the Navy if the Congress declares war or at the request of the President. So the Coast Guard is technically not a branch of the military at this time. Now you may ask, why are these emblems and descriptions of each branch important? Isn't it just sufficient to ask at intake whether or not the individual I'm meeting is a veteran? The answer is no, it's not enough. We have found in our work at home again that some, and not all of veterans from this generation, may not self-identify or consider themselves veterans. There are some who don't identify because they consider the word veteran an old word reserved for older generations. There are others who don't identify as veterans because they didn't participate in combat or deploy. I didn't consider myself a veteran before I joined home again. After I got out of the Marine Corps, I just said to myself, I'm a female veteran. I'm a female service member. I did my time. My father was a veteran, Vietnam veteran. My grandfathers were in World War II. So to me, it was an old term. So I didn't identify myself as a veteran until I started this position.
Right, and I think that's another reason why, as you were embarking on this work with veterans, you should consider how do you ask the question at intake or when you're first meeting a veteran. What are some ways to begin thinking about that? Because just as you would ask a client to identify their race, their ethnicity, their culture, their religion, you should also ask them what branch of the military the veteran served once they do disclose. This question is going to demonstrate an interest and a curiosity in the veteran's military experience, and it begins the engagement process that is mindful of their culture and of their strengths.
I just want to add something in. When you're speaking to a veteran, asking them what branch of services they're in, they're proud of what branch they chose. However they decided to sign up, they are proud of their branch, and they want to be referred to as the member of that branch. So if you call, for example, a Marine a soldier, they may get offended. So that's one of the reasons why we're going over this. Each branch has their own name.
Right. So we have another poll question. It's our second one. And the question is, what does the following acronym stand for as it relates to one of the conflicts the U.S. has participated in since September 11th? The acronym is OEF. Is it Operation Efficient Fighting, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Effective Fighting, Operation Enforcing Freedom? So we'll give you guys a few minutes to just answer that question. All right, we're just getting the results.
Very nice.
Well done.
Very nice.
So the right answer is Operation Enduring Freedom. Rebecca's going to tell us a little bit more about this conflict.
To continue to lay the groundwork for understanding a veteran's experience, we must identify the difference between the following operations. Operation Enduring Freedom, known as OEF, is a multinational military operation aimed at dismantling terrorist groups, mostly in Afghanistan. It officially began on October 7, 2001 in response to the 9/11 attacks. Operation Iraqi Freedom, known as OIF, also known as the Iraq War, began on March 20, 2003. Operation New Dawn is referred to as OND, which began on September 1, 2010. It marked the official end to OIF and combat operations by U.S. forces in Iraq. It represented a shift from a predominantly military presence to a civilian one. OND ended December 15, 2001. Current reports show that because of the disagreement between Iraq and the U.S. on whether American troops should be granted legal immunity, there are now approximately 13,000 service members across the border in Kuwait.
So in order to continue the engagement process that honors military culture, we recommend that you ask where a veteran has deployed once he or she has disclosed that they have. In addition, keep in mind that not all veterans deploy to either Iraq or Afghanistan. They can deploy to many of the different countries of which we have allies with. And deployment means that you're away from home, from your home base for at least 6 months or more. Nonetheless, it's important to keep this distinction in mind because the terrain between Afghanistan and Iraq is so different. For example, we know that there's infrastructure in Iraq, and they have some of the same commodities that we have to exposure here, like cell phones and internet. Those things are available in Iraq, whereas alternatively a deployment to Afghanistan is very different because it's not nearly as developed as Iraq. A veteran who has deployed to Iraq may have different reintegration struggles compared to a veteran who has deployed to Afghanistan. And we must therefore not make assumptions that all deployments were like the movie The Hurt Locker, and instead ask and be curious and ask, what was it like for them? Tell me, what was it like?
I also want to add, Adriana, too, that we also have to think about people deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan. To both, and then coming back with those reintegration challenges.
Exactly.
So you see the slide up here. We give you a couple of statistics. So 2.3 million Americans have deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, or both. More than half have actually deployed more than once. And according to a needs assessment by the RAND Corporation since October 1st, 2001, approximately 85,000 Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have returned to New York State.
And I believe the last time we looked it up, New York State had the 4th largest amount of OEF veterans in the country. So for those of you who are listening in from New York, this is definitely something for us to be mindful of. Mm-hmm. They're very much in our community.
That's right. This next slide, I can't stand updating this slide. We have to do it for all of our trainings because we think it's important to give you the numbers. Every time I do it, which is pretty often, I always have to make a change. The only change that I really don't have to make anymore is Operation Iraqi Freedom, which is a good thing. But Afghanistan is steadily moving still. But seeing these numbers right now, it's also a stark contrast to Vietnam, which we have to keep in mind. It's the only war that we can really compare this generation to because of its length in years. In total, the number of Vietnam veterans who died in and out of theater of war was 89,000. Now compare that to the number we see here, and you will note that because of the advances in technology, we will be working with many more veterans who have service-connected disabilities like TBI than any other time in our nation's history, which means we have to gear up better to understand their needs.
Before we move any further, we thought it would be important to define a traumatic brain injury, which is the hallmark wound of this generation. TBI may knock you out briefly or for an extended period of time. You may feel confused or see stars. The most common form of TBI in the military is mild. A concussion is another word for a mild TBI, which can also occur when a head is shaken or hit. And in order to give you a clearer picture of TBI, what we wanted to do was include a pseudo cheat sheet of symptoms a veteran will experience, which we broke up by physical, cognitive, and emotional symptoms that a veteran will experience. Also, it's those veterans who have a history of prior concussion and or a history of substance abuse that are at a higher risk of developing TBI. So our next poll question is to ask you guys, most brain injuries are mild and most people recover in a matter of weeks. Is that true or false? And we'll give you guys a couple seconds to pick the right one, or the best answer.
All right, I think we're good. So a majority of you think that most brain injuries are mild and most people recover in a matter of weeks.
That's correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
Very good. Okay. So now to clarify, reports show that 10% of the 2.3 million who have served have been diagnosed with a TBI, and only 45 to 90,000 of troops have suffered moderate to severe TBI. Most TBIs are mild. Keep in mind that not all TBI injuries are deployment related. 85% of TBIs occur in a non-deployed setting. Common causes of a TBI include car crashes, falls, sports, recreation activities, and military training. Okay, now let's bring our attention back to military culture. We wanted to provide you a snapshot of the impact that TBI has amongst the armed services broken up by branch. As you can see, the Army has almost 4 times the number of TBI cases. This is in part because they are the largest branch and because their roles, or MOS, meaning military occupational specialty, which is the job you have in the military, such as being tank drivers, paratroopers, and the under-equipped Humvees they use for transportation, leave them more susceptible to roadside bombs, aka improvised explosive devices, or IEDs.
That's right. Which brings us yet to another important question that you should be asking veterans when they come to your program seeking services, such as, what was your job while you were in the military? This information and their description of their responsibilities will help you gain a sense of their skills that can be used to aid the recovery process.
Whether a TBI be mild or severe, they can be stressful as with any other injuries. So this list represents the stressful challenges that are associated with having a TBI. It can be life-changing for the patient, but also affects their professional and personal lives as well. Loss of support, loss of job, increased psychological stress, decreased ability to function as a parent. And the next one, let's see here. Okay, so how's the military that much different than civilian culture? In the military, we value collectivism. It is important to become part of a group. In boot camp, you learn that the only way you survive is to put the group's goals ahead of your own in order to complete the mission. My day-to-day living, learning, and ability to move up in the ranks were set by the Marine Corps. In the military, the rules were clear, absolute, and understood by all. There were no shades of gray. I knew what was expected of me. I was trained to trust my leaders and depend on them for major decisions. There was little room for individualism and autonomy, and there was a respect for authority without being weak. Most importantly, there was a sense of belonging I felt in the Marine Corps that cannot be replicated in my current civilian world. I don't care whether you get out and, whether you're a World War II veteran, a Korean War veteran, a Vietnam veteran, it is completely different. No matter what generation has served, you will not get this sense in the civilian world. The Marines are trained are to be mission focused, and it's a skill that I have brought to every job I've had since. Okay, next we have listed the 4 cardinal rules that all branches of service install via training. The first and most important is the regard for their comrades, followed by respect for their leaders. Unit cohesion is extremely important. That's why one of the successful things as far as the reintegration process is to veterans like working together. It's that peer-to-peer that's going to help them make them be successful. Once they find out that a veteran has gone into one of your facilities and used your services, I guarantee you if they have a positive experience, they will tell other veterans that they know.
Right.
The next is devotion to duty and to the mission. They are fully 100% committed to what they're doing for the military. The third is stoicism, emotional restraint. I guess the thing that I like to say is as far as stoicism, it's not that you're a robot or that you're brainwashed. It's just that when you're at a high level of alert, or when you're on an exercise or training or a mission, there isn't time to have that emotional ups and downs that you kind of see in the civilian world. The training is that you need to be focused and serious to get the job done.
That's right.
And the fourth, as well as the importance of adhering to the chain of command. My example, I always use, in working with Adriana, as far as, supervision, I always follow the chain of command. I don't like to step on toes. I don't like to go around. I want to follow the rules, and I want to do the right thing, and most service members want to do the same thing. But being part of the military is being a part of something that is bigger than you. You become selfless, and that carries out into the civilian world.
Right. So in our work over the last 2 years, we've looked at countless research studies and met many veterans who've described their connection to their comrades. And the theme we keep hearing over and over again is the bond that they felt amongst those who served. An interesting piece of research which we've come across, which used focus groups, found that the bond service members' experience can be described and compared to that of a bond between a parent and child. Which leads us to considering, why do so many research findings note that veterans are not seeking treatment? One of the reasons may be stigma, for sure, and perceived as being weak. However, there's this psychological distance from the civilian world that is not only due to stigma. That's just one of the many variables. It's because of the unit cohesiveness and the other cardinal rules that we outlined, which makes it an experience unlike anything else in the civilian world that we would experience. This sense of separateness can cause a service member to feel that they are in a separate, civilized, specialized society, and it can become an obstacle, just an obstacle, to the reintegration process. So to begin breaking some of these walls down between civilians and veterans, we civilians need to go through some training of our own and begin dispelling some of the myths we believe about the military.
I like when we do this slide because we hear different answers all the time, but this is a list of why service members join the military. There are a number of benefits that a service member receives for joining. Some are more tangible than others, and we highlight the reasons for joining in all of our trainings to help our audience begin to see that the veterans they are serving were civilians once too. Mm-hmm. They had roles, identities, and other lives before joining the military. For example, I joined the military because of family tradition and because I wanted to serve my country. Since my father was in the Vietnam War, I had always wanted to, as a child, to serve in the military. So I could have gone to college. I had a couple of scholarships to play at some really good schools in the Northeast to play field hockey, but I really was committed to serve my country, so I did so right after high school.
Thanks for sharing, Rebecca. Mm-hmm. That reminds me of yet another best practice approach to working with veterans is to ask them why they joined. This, again, is going to infuse a cultural lens into your work and bring the veteran's voice into the room. Understanding some of these values of this culture is an integral part of the work. We've met many well-intentioned providers looking to work with veterans who open up their own programs, who are not getting the number of veterans they need to fulfill grant obligations, for example. And what I say to them is understanding the values of this culture is the first step in getting them in the door.
That's right, that's right. And for this reason, we want to highlight some of the values that this culture possesses, which research has confirmed. It's not just me. I speak on my own experience. I don't speak, for all veterans, but I've had, quite the experience with them. So, so a strong emphasis on character development, morale, and welfare can be seen. The military can actually be seen as a positive institution. These military values are important to note because they serve as a standard of conduct and regulate their lives. In addition, these values govern their daily lives both on and off duty because service members must be ready at all times to carry out a mission at all times. So for me, as a Marine, I was a Marine 24/7. Even though majority of the time being on active duty, Monday through Friday, had liberty on the weekends, I was still a Marine 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We also want to be mindful of two very important subgroups within the military, who Home Again has intimate awareness of, and which we talk more about in other trainings. The first is women in the military. Women actually make up a little bit more than 14% of service members who have served in OIF and OAF. The formal policy of the military is that women are to be excluded from an assignment to a combat arms unit, but the lines between combat and non-combat missions have been blurry in both OEF and OIF. The fact is is that women are in close proximity with ground combat units due to their jobs, which include convoy security, leading convoys into and through ground combat, patrolling main supply routes.
Another thing that we found is how there's going to be an increase in the number of female veterans that the Department of Defense is anticipating. I believe the number at this point is 1.8 million, and that number is from 2010, and they're anticipating at least double that by 2036. When another subgroup within the military that we want you guys to be mindful of, and which we train a lot on, is the children of veterans. It's been our argument in the dissemination of our training over the last 2 years that we're all capable of working with military families, meaning that we can continue to provide our interventions or doing business as usual when working with military families, as long as you keep in mind the cultural aspects. One of the more pivotal pieces of research we've come across looked at deployment stress for military families. And it found that when a parent deploys, the separation of the parent from the child influences their development. And it went further and it looked at, you know, how can we compare this to something that families who are civilians will experience. They found that the effects of child separation due to deployment are similar to those families who have experienced divorce, parental incarceration, migration, and hospitalization. Therefore, if you've ever worked with any of these families who've experienced any of these life events, then you can work with military families. It's that simple.
Okay. The crux of our training maintains that the majority of veterans returning home are fine, no diagnosis. We always say, and media actually portrays this, is that, you know, on TV you either see the military hero, the decorated war hero, who's done something wonderful while on deployment, or you hear about the downtrodden, mental health diagnosed veteran who just can't make it, when actually that's only, both of those combined are only 1/3 of the population or less. So 70% of the veterans who are coming back and getting out of the military just want to move on with their lives. They just want to move on with their lives. So we're going to go over the 5 critical challenges or tasks that service members need to master. We highlight that many veterans are facing reintegration obstacles, not symptoms. One of the reasons we got started doing this work was for our frustration at the amount of problem-saturated information we were hearing about our veterans. Adriana, you know, I've been at home again now for almost 2 years. And I'd say about 6 months into it, we had gone to a lot of educational conferences on veterans, you know, symposiums, talks, and it was just negative, 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 negatives. These are the problems. This is the, you know, it was just one thing after the other. And then they all have trauma, and they can't move on when we know that's not the case. So we just looked at each other at one of these and said, we're done. This is not, we want to help veterans, but this is not the way to do it. So that's why this whole training started, because we want to show you that there are strengths that veterans possess, that they can move on, that they can reintegrate, and that they can be successful. So we want to review some of these. The first is overcoming alienation. Even though I got out in 2001, I felt a sense of alienation when I returned home. And I was actually unsure of where I fit in. I thought I've had this great Marine Corps experience. You know, I worked with the White House. I thought it was going to be this big deal. I was going to get a job, you know, with the FBI or something like that. Not the case at all. So I immediately, you know, I had so many choices. I had choices that I needed to make. But when I came home, amongst those choices, which we'll get to in a second, my parents were very supportive of my Marine Corps career. They thought it was fantastic, but I have 2 sisters, and my sisters were not supportive. They didn't understand why I wanted to do it. I actually had to work my way back into their lives. It took me and my older sister up until probably about 2 years ago to really understand why I joined and what I did in the Marine Corps. I can remember being home on leave, which is basically, you know, a vacation. I'd come home and visit my parents, and my sister would say, "Why are you on leave? Why are you here? Aren't you supposed to be in the Marine Corps?" Like, what are you doing home? But she never asked more questions. So it took until a couple years ago for her to say, I really want to know what you did in the Marine Corps. So I felt alienated because people, when I came back, people had no idea what I had been through in that experience. So you can, and a veteran can feel alienated, whatever their experience may be. The second is moving from simplicity to complexity. This challenge can really run the gamut from wearing camis, aka uniforms, every day to thinking of what to cook for dinner. You know, I always say when we do these trainings, you know, in the military, when you're active duty, you have a roof over your head, you have a paycheck every 2 weeks, you have meals 3 times a day. You don't really have to think because all you have to do, everything's prescribed for you to do. So when you get out, a veteran can say, oh my gosh, do I want to go to school? Do I not want to go to school? Do I want a part-time job? Do I want a full-time job? I need to find a place to live if I'm not going to go back home to mommy and daddy. You know, I need to get insurance. I need to. So there's all these questions. So you had, and that's why there's that theory of why veterans actually go back into the military because, or they even want to deploy again because of that. They know that because of that structure, because they know what's going to happen next. In the civilian world, you really don't. Let's see. The third is replacing war with another form of high, or replacing your military service with another form of high. One of the documented problems that some veterans have experienced includes getting speeding tickets when they return home because they are so used to driving the way they were trained to drive while on deployment. Being in a military convoy, all you're thinking about is moving from point A to point B and staying alive. So that's why there's been so many speeding tickets, especially here in the city, here in New York City too, because, you know, who wants to be stuck in traffic, you know, on the George Washington Bridge with nowhere to go? And anyway, so for me, I just recently got into mixed martial arts training. And I had a trainer, I had been working out, and I was just kind of bored, and I wanted to get in better shape, and I found out that he was a mixed martial artist, and I started training with him, and I started getting this high. I started getting the high that I didn't realize was the same high that I got during my military training in the Marine Corps. How he would push me, and that there was no excuse, and so now I'm addicted to it because when I'm working out with him, I'm getting that high.
Yeah, you're in the zone.
I'm in the zone, and I like it, but it reminds me of how I felt back then. Go ahead.
Just to go back for 1 second, when you came home, you were attempting to find a job, and you had to. What was the job that you found?
Oh, so right, as I get back to that. So when I got out of the Marine Corps, I went back home to mommy and daddy. I was only 21 years old. Didn't have enough money to live on my own yet. So I decided. I thought I was going to get a job. Like I said, I had all these skills. My mom had a connection at the FBI, but I didn't have a college degree. So I started at community college, but my first job was a waitress. I actually started off as a hostess and then moved to waitressing. But it's funny because I had no clothes. I literally had to go buy an entire wardrobe because I had no clothes. So I had my uniform 5 days a week and maybe a couple of civilian clothes. That's what we call them, a couple of civilian clothes. But I literally, had to go shopping.
Right. So just think about, from going to being a Marine
to being a hostess.
To being a hostess
at a restaurant. Yeah.
When you were in the Marine, what was your actual job?
I actually worked with. I was I was a field radio operator, but I actually worked with the National Security Agency. I worked with classified materials in the Marine Corps, and I was the unit that dealt with the anthrax attacks. So I went from that
anthrax attacks to hosting at a restaurant.
Right, and then starting off college.
We would give you all these examples to let you know that moving beyond their life in the military and coming to peace with themselves and others, which is number 4 and 5, is a process that veterans will experience and revisit throughout their lives. One of the most rewarding moments in our work was the feedback we received from a World War II veteran who sat through our training. He's a Marine and served in the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. He said to us that in the 60 years since his service, no one ever asked him to consider the positive aspects he gained from his Marine Corps experience. We encourage you to consider these reintegration challenges and see them as opportunities to learn from veterans Ask them what they feel they accomplished during their military career and how they were challenged. You can use these responses as tools for your interventions to help them establish successfully and reintegrate back into the civilian world.
I actually just spoke to a veteran before we did this webinar. He was retired, from the U.S. Army Reserve, so he spent 20 years in the U.S. Army Reserve. He did nothing else but work construction while he was in the reserves, did 20 years, did 2 deployments to Iraq, was a platoon sergeant who was in charge of 50 soldiers over there, and now he doesn't have a job. Now he doesn't have a job. So he's saying, what does my 20 years mean to me? So he's trying to find his purpose now that he's out of the Army. And that can be a challenge. That can definitely be a challenge.
Sure. We do want to highlight the risk factors that this population is experiencing. So we mentioned earlier the RAND Corporation carried out a needs assessment in 2011 on OIF and OEF veterans in New York State. They used focus groups and surveys, and in a survey of 2,500 OEF service members and veterans, they reported that 16% had a probable diagnosis of PTSD and major depressive disorder, 34% with a mental health need. The risk for major depression was 2 to 4 times higher than their civilian peers. The risk for PTSD was 8 times higher than that of non-veterans. A third of the veterans in need sought mental health treatment, and only half seeking treatment felt they received minimally adequate treatment. Given this finding, that only half are satisfied with the treatment they receive, it's important that we all gear up to provide better care, improve our engagement strategies, and ensure that their needs are met.
Because of the risk factors we've just mentioned, we must keep in mind that there are strengths veterans possess. I've been saying that the whole hour, but I'll keep saying it, that will alleviate and protect them from serious problems arising. It's important that you are as familiar with the risk factors as you are with protective factors, which include active coping strategies, positive outlook, strong leadership support, economic resources, open communication based on empathy and respect, proactive planning, finding meaning and a sense of purpose, collaborative problem solving, and above all, strong community and social support. We also can't forget to mention the effect that TBI can have on suicidal ideation. Since the risk of suicide increases post-TBI, it is a must that families and caregivers be informed about the risk factors and warning signs. Having a severe TBI can have an effect on everyday decision-making and sound judgment, and can make one be in an impulsive state of mind. The TBI can affect this part of the brain and decision-making process, so cognitive deficits, poor judgment, impulsivity, and poor decision-making ability.
Right. Again, that's for severe TBI. Mm-hmm. So when does a veteran need a higher level of care? As we said, most service members with a mild TBI do not need special care, and the symptoms typically abate over time. After a year, approximately 10% will have enduring problems. Therefore, we have included here some signs and symptoms for you to determine if a veteran is in need of a higher level of care, such as if they continue to experience dizziness and headaches, nausea, not thinking clearly, severe and enduring arousal, not being able to feel pleasure, behaving in an intensely detached manner, unable to do their job, suicidal or homicidal wishes or intent. And because a TBI can present a range of challenges, we must also keep military families in mind and the impact the injury has on them. First, we must identify the injury can include grieving the loss of who they were, because some with severe injuries may not be able to return to the same level of functioning prior to their injury. Next, because of the involvement of family members is so important to a speedy recovery, we have to keep in mind how these changes in their behavior, such as a lack of inhibition, anger, outbursts, withdrawal, apathy, the depression, can impact the family. These changes in behaviors can be confusing to a child and to younger children because they may begin to assume responsibility for the problems that they see for the veteran, or that the injured parent no longer loves them. Efforts should be made to reduce the child's exposure to outbursts, and talking to the child and helping them understand that Dad's grumpy right now. He's upset and angry because his brain hurts. He sometimes says things or does things he doesn't really mean. Families also need to cope with the social isolation that comes with the exhausting caregiving responsibilities and the fear of how the TBI patient is going to behave. Part of the focus really needs to be to help that family avoid that isolation and engage in community supports. And then last but not least is the self-care for the family, to ensure that the family is in fact doing things that kind of take them away from their caretaking responsibilities, to do things that are fun, that they enjoy, that is not surrounded, again, around the care. Although the stressors can take a toll on military families, as we've mentioned today, strengths, protective factors. These strengths and protective factors have been found within research. Research has shown that many military families will work out the problems that have arisen during the service member's deployment once they return home, because the families are resilient. Family resilience is the rule, not the exception. Military families are malleable. They can bounce back. In our 6-hour certificate program, we actually outline at length many of the protective factors that military families bring to the table. And it's important to have knowledge of these strengths, as they are really crucial to engagement. And we really can't emphasize enough. You need to know the risk factors that these military families experience, as well as the protective factors. They're just as important. Now that we've reviewed some of the variables, what we want to reflect is understanding military culture and important to the recovery process. And the answer is yes, 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 yes.
So I want to go over some do's and don'ts to a speedy recovery for those diagnosed with a TBI. So for a person who is diagnosed with a TBI, they need to get appropriate amounts of sleep. They need to get into a regular routine of everyday activities, exercise, eating regularly, do one thing at a time, and increase the activity slowly. Use reminders, use your smartphone, post-it notes, engage in activities that require fine motor skills, playing an instrument, writing, puzzles, Sudoku, I guess, you know, I see people do that. People do it on the train all the time. Support family members who will be caring for veterans and encourage their own self-care.
Yeah. So don't engage in activities that can produce another brain injury. Don't drink alcohol or excessive amounts of alcohol, or take over-the-counter sleep medications. We also, just to go back for 1 second, to increase activity slowly. Many veterans might be more interested in perhaps just jumping right back into things. So we want to keep in mind that we have to explain to them, you got to go slow, you have to work back into this, you have to work back into this, because we know that they have the capacity to really take things to, you know, a really high degree. And so we want to remind them to use this opportunity to increase their activity slowly.
That's right. Okay, so this next slide should be your pseudo cheat sheet of what to say and not to say when working with service members. We show this slide in every single training, no matter what we do. So always thank a veteran for their service. Keep the politics out when you're talking to a service member. Be mindful and curious of what branch the service member was in, which we talked about. Be curious of their lives outside of the military. Remember that they have other identities and roles. I was a Marine, but that was a part of my life. That was not my whole life. Mm-hmm. It was an experience that I had that I would never take back and that I absolutely loved, but it's not fully who I am. Mm-hmm. Let the veteran tell you their story when they are ready, and respect their process. I say to Adriana in our trainings too, and there's been veterans in our trainings, the worst thing you could do is pretend or try to walk around like you're walking on eggshells. That, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions, but don't say these don't things on the side here.
Right.
So, you know, did you kill somebody? How was it over there? You know, yeah, it was hot.
Was it hot?
Was it hot over there? You know, we get that. There's a video that we show that, you know, it's kind of a parody that's pretty funny. You know, like for me, I get the question of, oh, you were a female Marine? Oh, so you're like G.I. Jane? Did you shave your head? Meanwhile, you know, I'm wearing, you know, a skirt and heels, so that's, you know, it's a little bit different. Don't assume that every service member was in combat. There are a lot of, when a unit deploys, you know, to Iraq or Afghanistan, there's a lot that needs to happen. It's not just the people, the service members that are on the front lines. There is admin, there's engineers, there's HR. I mean, there's all kinds. There's cooks who have to serve the food. So even though they deployed, still respect the fact that even though they weren't on the front lines, they still deployed and they still did their time. And
some of them didn't deploy and in fact stayed stateside. You know, they didn't deploy and they were here in the United States, and that's you know, can be considered one of the backbone of the military. If they're not here to make sure things are running right, then the folks who deploy don't have the resources they need. Mm-hmm. So again, don't make assumptions that they all deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan.
That's right, and don't make assumptions on anyone's military career. The service member is an expert in their own military career. Yes, I do know a lot of people who are in the military. I can speak of their stories, but I can really only speak of my own experience.
So we have some recommendations for you guys.
I was at the Veterans Mental Health Coalition the other week, and we kind of did a brainstorming because there's a lot of organizations who aren't getting veterans to come in the door. Right. The first thing that you need to do for your organization is hire veterans.
If you really want to be veteran friendly and you need veterans in your door, hire veterans. Even more so if you're not a nonprofit, you can get a tax break if you hire veterans.
That's right. Military cultural competency for all staff, and that's what we talked about today, understanding the culture to be able to work with this population. Establish a peer discussion groups for veterans. Change the language on your intake forms to include veteran-friendly language. For example, if you ask on your intake forms, are you a veteran? We discussed earlier that some veterans don't self-identify themselves as veterans, A, and B, they consider it an old term. Mm-hmm. So you can ask something like, have you ever served in the U.S. military or the U.S. Armed Forces? Mm-hmm. That's kind of a more, you know, a broader question. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind that all veterans will disclose their status. Immerse yourself in literature about military culture.
Right.
I was at the National Association of Social Workers Veterans Health Initiative conference back in February, and I was in one of those breakout sessions, and a woman who was a social worker said that I'm just so afraid. I'm so afraid I don't know anything.
About working with
about working with the military. The information is out there. It's the choice that you all have to make if you want to learn about it. It's like learning about any other subject. If you want to learn about a new type of cooking style, or, you know, I wanted to learn about mixed martial arts, you can seek this information. It is out there. And also connect with organizations serving veterans and military families. We talked about earlier, you do not need to reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. There's no need. There are so many wonderful organizations in this country that are working with veterans right now that you need to collaborate and grow together in order to be successful.
But that said, also too, connecting with organizations also means understanding that this generation of veterans is in fact very internet savvy, and they are more likely to connect via social networking. Mm-hmm. So ensure that your social networking sites, if your organization has one, your Facebook, your Twitter, does in fact reflect the fact that you are attempting to be veteran friendly and has that veteran friendly language. Also, too, if you do begin connecting with other organizations, determine what services they're providing. We have found many times in some of the networking events that we've gone to that some of the organizations that we're doing that we work with are all providing the same services. So we want to know whether or not they're doubling up of services, because a complaint we have heard time and time again is veterans don't know where to go. They don't know where to go. There's no streamlined place to get some of this information. So that's why you have to connect with organizations in your community serving veterans and military families.
One of our trainers, he was on the first slide, Joshua Getchione, he was an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran in the 82nd Airborne. He now works in Westchester County, and he works for the Family Services of Westchester, and one of the things, he's the Veterans Director, Program Director of Veterans Outreach. And what he did is he took all the association organizations in Westchester County and brought them together to see what services were available to veterans, and actually made a service provider network, which is becoming pretty successful. So it's kind of like doing that boots on the ground work to see what is in your community and bringing everybody together.
And you can't expect that you're going to have veterans coming to your door if you just put a sign on your door that says we're veteran friendly. You can't just look for veterans during your 9-to-5 job. You have to understand that you need to go out there and really expose yourself to them. And anyone can put a sign on their door that they serve veterans, but a lot more needs to be implemented in order for you and a veteran to be successful. So that's all for us on our end. I think, Carla, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, right before, thank you guys so much for doing this, and I know it was very informative for me. I hope everyone who attended feels the same way. Before we start the question and answer session, I just have a few slides just to share some information about the Brain Injury Association of New York State. We are a statewide nonprofit membership organization that advocates on behalf of individuals with brain injury and their families. I personally work with the two at-risk populations for brain injury, veterans and children. So our webinars that we've been doing monthly kind of alternate between those two populations. Here's our address, our contact information. By all means, I encourage you to contact me with any questions. My email actually will be in a follow-up email sent from GoToWebinar. Again, we will be posting the slides and the recording to our website. It's right on there, www.bianys.org. If you need to get a hold of us, we have some wonderful resources that are, we also have a line of veteran-related resources, 2 award-winning DVDs, Beyond the Invisible and Coming Home. They each follow 3 different New York State veterans who have sustained traumatic brain injuries, what the challenges are like, what they're dealing with. I encourage you, if you don't have a copy of these, to either view it on our website or contact us for copies. We also have posters at throughway rest stops for returning military personnel, a nice booklet introducing brain injury and some of the steps you can take if you suspect you have sustained a brain injury. Our next webinar is on post-concussion syndrome, schools and the law. So we have some information up on our website about that. We would love to start the question and answer
I just want to, Carla, if I could just make 2. I'm sorry, if I could just make 2 corrections from our presentation.
Absolutely.
Before the questions get started, when I went over the military branches, when I was speaking, the military branches were not in the way that the emblems were in the PowerPoint presentation. So I just wanted to clarify that. So when you do get, if you want to, download this presentation, it went Navy, Marine Corps, Army, Air Force, and Coast Guard. And I put them in that order because that was the order of when each of those branches started. So I just want to clarify that. And then the female veteran statistic, female veterans will grow from 1.8 million, they're projecting to 2.1 million by 2036.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I know that will be helpful when people are viewing the recording. So thank you. We do already actually have some questions. Are you both ready to answer?
Sure.
Okay. I do have one question here. I think it's directed to Rebecca, actually. It says, you said that after you completed your service, you attended community college. What were your experiences there? And is there something the community college could have done to better serve you as a student?
That's a great question. I actually, because I was 21 years old and I went to a community college in Massachusetts, I decided, that I was going to go into the criminal justice field. And I felt completely out of place at my community college. There was no, I knew that I had the GI Bill, which I started using. because I knew that I contributed to it while I was in the Marine Corps. So I did use the GI Bill for community college. So there was no veteran counselors, there was nothing like there is today. And then I transferred actually to George Mason University because my husband at the time was stationed at Quantico, and there was no support there as well. So that is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to get into higher education. Obviously I liked working in education, A, but B, the track that I've taken is because I didn't receive any services from either of the schools. So to answer your question, it was really difficult for me to transfer from the military into school because all the students were younger, nobody was focused. When I went to school, all I wanted to do was learn and get my degree. I was once a Marine, always a Marine. I was very mission focused. I was very, very goal-oriented, and I'm dealing with in a classroom with 17 and 18-year-olds who care about when they're going to smoke the next cigarette or have the next beer that they're not supposed to be having until they're 21. So I kind of had a difficult time there. But at Brooklyn College, I worked at Brooklyn College, and I was the education assistant coordinator of Veterans Affairs there. So I actually worked one-on-one with veterans who were transitioning from the military into school. So like I said, my experiences with veterans and non-traditional issues in that realm. It's kind of like I'm trying to pay it forward now, if that answers your question.
Excellent. I do have another question. We have a series of questions, actually. One person did want to point out that they believe qualified 501Cs can now benefit from tax benefits of hiring veterans, too. So yes, just a little side note. Thank you for that.
True. Yes.
Mm-hmm. We also have a question about wondering if you two are collaborating with, or if Home Again is collaborating with a VA. If so, in what capacity are you all functioning? For example, and this person's listening from a distance, they have AmeriCorps Vista who works with the VA in Salt Lake.
Well, we have trained a number of VA employees that have come to our site for training. We don't have a form. Historically, our program did have a relationship with the VA, but currently we are still trying to kind of work that out. We also have trained a few AmeriCorps employees about 2 years ago, and I believe they're from the AmeriCorps office in the Bronx.
We're actually talking and collaborating with the VA right now.
Yeah, we're hoping to establish something.
So I'd say in the next 6 months, we'll probably be inside those doors giving the training. But we've actually provided our training to a lot of employees at the VA, which is really neat.
Yeah.
That's great. And we are so happy to have you. I know I really enjoyed the presentation. A few more questions. There's one question I'm having a little difficulty understanding. I guess it has to do with veterans who can't find a job. Maybe have you been working with veterans who have trouble finding jobs and they stay at home? I guess what are your experience with those veterans, what you found helpful or challenging?
I guess for me, in my background, not necessarily for Home Again, but working with students and veteran students, as well as just veterans, like the veteran I just spoke to before this webinar, lost his job and now he's trying to find a job. And he doesn't know where to go, but he has all this experience that's brought with him. I think the first and most important thing is that the veteran needs to transfer those resume skills, which there are books out there, there are services out there that will help you transfer that military resume into a civilian resume, and getting into those job fairs, because there's a lot that you have that a veteran possesses that is marketable with their military experience, no matter what job they had, whether they were an infantryman or whether they worked with computers. There's a lot that can be done. There's a lot in New York City. There's a lot of job fairs. There's the support of the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs here, who actually does job fairs on a regular basis, and veteran-specific job fairs. So if there's a veteran looking for a job, make sure that you look for those. And there's also a lot of corporations and organizations around the country who are looking to hire veterans, for veterans to seek them out, like, for instance, J.B. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Verizon. There's a big handful, like USAA, obviously, they work with veterans. So there's a lot of companies who are looking to hire veterans. So to steer those in those companies as well.
I think the difficulty is that there isn't necessarily a resource or directory for us to send them to in order to find these jobs.
It just depends on the area that the veterans are in.
Exactly.
So they can, I mean, they can contact me if they want to.
Would you give similar advice? What happens if, say, the veteran seems to lack motivation, maybe they're in rehab? I know that's a little out of your realm if someone's in rehab, but is there anything you could do or you have positive experience, success with motivating or facilitating their participation in an intervention?
In an intervention to find a job, or an intervention to...
Just in general, with the whole reintegration, is there anything
okay.
that you found to work positively
Yes.
in facilitating their participation?
I've worked with quite a few veterans who do, who are frustrated, kind of, not necessarily down and out, but with the system when they come back. I've gone to this person and they just point me to another person when, service members used to A, B, C, and D. And so if they go to A and then have to go to D and come back to B and then to C, they get frustrated. They want to know that when they get a referral or something that they need to do something, that it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So in helping that, obviously, positive motivation, having like a peer mentor program, having another veteran who's been, who is struggling, and seeing them become successful, I'm telling you that peer-to-peer is what is going to help them with that motivation. Having a veteran that doesn't necessarily have had to have the same exact experience, but having a veteran that has been, reintegrating more successfully than the other one is totally going to help that veteran.
And I have actually seen that work a lot as well. We've had some experiences with community colleges, if anyone's here that works with veterans in community colleges or in college atmosphere, college environment, that the veteran groups, they have veteran groups that work very well, and really it does take that peer-to-peer. Another veteran is the best tool to get someone that needs help, a veteran that needs help, or just some advice to get them in that door. It does tend to be successful, and I've seen that myself too, with my experience.
Yep, 100%.
I do have a question here. Will Coast Guard veterans who enlisted after the switch to the Homeland Security be able to obtain services through the VA? Do you know?
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Of
Okay.
course.
Yep.
Yes. That's a good question. That's a great question.
Yeah, that was a good question. Threw me off. I do have just a sidebar. Someone commented about how you made the slide correction with the SEALs, the military protocol states that service branches are in order from Army, Marines, Navy comes next. Though it's older, the Navy shut down for a decade, Air Force, and then Coast Guard. So they just wanted to add that little side note. Do with it what you will. Also, I have someone who says they work with service members, veterans, and obviously trust is the first major issue in building a professional relationship as a counselor. They would like to know,
I agree.
do you have any specific tips for building trust? Part of this person's approach is to disclose a little about himself. For example, his family is a military family, or his professional history. I know you guys talked a lot about questions to ask, so I'm guessing that could be helpful. But did you have any other advice for this individual?
I think part of it is as clinically indicated, if you find that sharing some of your personal information is going to help that rapport, then by all means go right ahead. There's been some veterans that who are also service providers who we've met who do not disclose their veteran status to all of their patients, to all of their clients. So I think it really varies case by case. I would say that one thing that as a service provider that you should be mindful of is, why do you want to work with this population? I've been asked a number of different times by veterans why I'm doing what I'm doing as a civilian, and it's important to have that question answered for yourself, because part of the work is, like you said, establishing that trust, and they want to make sure that we're not going to exploit them as civilians, that we're not going to ask them all these intrusive questions, but that in fact we're there to guide them and support them in reintegrating back into the civilian world.
I also want to add into that too, Carla, to answer the question. So building that trust too is kind of is having a follow through. Yeah. So as far as being on time, as giving them answers, the referrals. So it's building that trust, saying, oh, I want to help you, and then they end up not helping you.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
Now, not that counselors would do that, but I've heard numerous veterans say, well, I went once, they said they were going to call me back, they never called me back. You know what I mean?
The consistency.
They never responded to my email. Yes,
yep.
It's all about
I agree. That's great advice. I have another question. This is actually, I think, a great question. And just to remind everyone, we do have about 4 minutes left, so we are short on time. If your question, for whatever reason, wasn't answered, by all means, please send it to an email. I'll make sure that Adriana and Rebecca see it and can answer it and address it. My email will be in a ton of emails. My email address, you'll see it. It's a very long last name, so once you get that email from GoToWebinar, just copy it into an email to me and just copy your question in there. This next question I thought was a great one. One of the challenges for reintegration, you spoke about this, is moving from simple to complex. What are some strategies that you would suggest college advisors use to assist a student veteran with that challenge?
Well, I think one thing that Rebecca had mentioned was the importance of having that structure in place. Some of the veterans that we've met have talked about how they go to register and there isn't the person there that they expected to have registered. There isn't a list of people that they should be talking to. So I think organizing that might be a good way to start.
So, for example, when I worked at Brooklyn College, I wanted to streamline the admissions process. I didn't want to make it such a hurdle for veterans. So, as far as the marketing material, when a student veteran was accepted to the school, I made them a checklist, as simple as it may be, what it takes to become a student at Brooklyn College, whether it's application. So they literally had check boxes. And they would carry around that piece of paper until it get all wrinkly and old, that pamphlet, the whole thing. But they want that step process. And when they go to that step, they want an answer. So you need, a college advisor, it's not just the office that you're in that's working with veterans. It has to be the entire campus. So there needs to be, everybody has got to work together to know. So that's when the military culture, comes into play, because it's not just the college advisors and the benefits advisors that are dealing with this. It's the faculty as well. So everybody needs to be on board as far as this process, and it actually helps. The admissions process was helped. We called it like one-stop shop, basically, and that's what veterans want. They want it so simple that they don't really have to think about it.
Right, and that's again kind of like what they're used to.
I mean, that's the ideal. There will be hiccups. But I'm just saying that streamlining that process is going to be so beneficial. But everybody's going to be on board with it.
Thank you. I'll take a couple more questions here. I know I'm seeing a lot of questions about can individuals get the PowerPoint presentation slides emailed to them. We will be posting these on our website with the recording. If you do want the slides emailed to you directly, by all means send me a reminder email and I will be happy to get those out to you. I'm also seeing, which I'm very happy to see, I love when I see this as a result of webinars, a lot of people sharing resources. So I, again, work with veterans. Yeah, so I will be happy to exchange these. I'll take this down and exchange them and share them with Adriana and with Rebecca, and I will take them down myself. So thank you to those of you who attended the webinar and who are providing these resources. This is what we need to do. We need to work together. We need to share information, and that's the way we're going to be able to best help individuals. So thank you for sharing all your wonderful resources. I have another question here.
I just want to, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, since we only have a little bit of time left, if anybody's interested in us doing training for them or their employees, like, please just let us know. You have our website, you have our contact. Yeah. But the 6-hour one is actually an actual certificate that is certified. You can actually get KSACs for it.
Right. In social work CEUs.
Social work CEUs. So if we just want to give a plug for our military cultural training certificate program.
Right, and we're also certified by OASIS office. We're certified by OASIS and the New York State of Regents.
Right. Yep. So
Sorry.
I just want to say that this was kind of like an appetizer to what we have. This is nothing compared to what we can do for you. So I just wanted to put that out there.
No, that's great. Thank you. Okay, one last question. Again, if you didn't get your question answered, please send it to me in email. I can't stress this enough. Don't let it go unanswered. I will be happy to send it along. I know Adriana and Rebecca would be happy to answer it. I did include my email in the chat section, so it's there. Copy it, paste it, send me your question in email. Again, I can't stress it enough. Don't let it go unanswered. The last question I have, I think we have a lot of people here that are working with veterans in a higher education setting. So these are always good questions to ask. I have one here that says, can you talk about some challenges that you have either experienced or seen other people experience, students with a TBI possibly that are attending college, memory, anxiety, attention. Is there anything that you both have noticed? I know in my experience, a lot of times it is issues with memory. There is a heightened level of anxiety, so some adjustments may have to be made to accommodate that student. I don't know if you, Rebecca, or Adriana have seen anything in your experience with Home Again.
Well, not in the Home Again necessarily, but as a higher education administrator, actually,
we did.
We actually did.
We had,
take that back.
We did work with interns in the past who did have a TBI, and part of the work that we had with them is to kind of provide those accommodations. He was very open about his diagnosis and what he needed in order to perform and be successful at his job here. So there was breaks that he took. He used Post-it notes a lot. He used his iPhone for reminders, and he and I established a relationship that he could be rather open with me when telling me he was having a really bad day and he was having a headache, so he needed to go out and have a smoke break or just step away from the computer. So I think it's just providing some of those accommodations, perhaps even working with the disability office to determine whether or not any reasonable accommodations can be made for some of the student veterans that you're seeing on campus. But
whether it's test taking or anything like that, if you had, if you had a learning disability, you know what I mean? So it's the steps you take along with that.
But all that took place, and all that came forward once I established that trust with the veteran.
Mm-hmm. So that'll take time because there's also that stigma that even though they have this injury, some veterans aren't willing to deal with it yet, right? Or seek help.
All right. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We've gone a little over, which is always a good thing. I do want to thank you, Adriana, Rebecca. It was a pleasure. I'm very happy that we could collaborate and have this webinar. Thank you all for attending. Again, if you have any questions, by all means, please email me. I will be happy to get them to Adriana and Rebecca, or happy to answer them if I can answer them myself. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you very much.